Court records show that a senior police official appeared before a municipal court after being cited for multiple violations stemming from a traffic stop that occurred during a late-night patrol operation. According to official filings, the officer, identified in proceedings only by rank and position to avoid prejudicing parallel administrative reviews, was serving as a police chief at the time of the incident. Investigators stated that the stop escalated when the official allegedly refused to comply with routine enforcement procedures and asserted that statutory rules did not apply to him because of his position within law enforcement. The matter was scheduled for hearing following a standard review by the city prosecutor's office, which determined that sufficient evidence existed to proceed. The case was heard by Judge Frank Caprio, a jurist widely known for presiding over high-volume municipal dockets and for applying statutory penalties based on the specific facts presented in each case. Court transcripts indicate that the hearing followed customary procedure, with the prosecution outlining the charges, presenting documentation, and submitting testimony from officers involved in the original stop. These materials included dash camera footage, written citations, and internal communications logs that established a timeline of events. According to the prosecution, the police chief was stopped for violations that included improper use of emergency privileges, failure to produce required documentation, and conduct unbecoming of an officer, all of which are subject to penalties under municipal and state codes. Background information presented to the court showed that the officer had risen through departmental ranks over several decades and was responsible for supervising operational units and enforcing departmental compliance with state law. Prosecutors argued that this background heightened, rather than reduced, the obligation to adhere strictly to legal standards. The court was informed that the incident occurred outside the officer's normal jurisdiction and during a time when he was not responding to an emergency call, a factor relevant under traffic and public safety statutes. The defense did not dispute that the stop occurred but contested the interpretation of the officer's conduct and the applicability of certain penalties. During the hearing, Judge Caprio questioned both sides on the factual record, focusing on whether the statutory elements of each cited violation had been met. The judge reviewed the video evidence frame by frame and asked clarifying questions regarding departmental policy and state law governing emergency vehicle operation. According to the transcript, the judge emphasized that the court's role was limited to applying the law as written and assessing the evidence presented, without regard to rank, reputation, or position. He noted that uniform enforcement of the law is a foundational principle of the justice system. The defense argued that the officer believed he was acting within discretionary authority granted to law enforcement executives and that any procedural errors were administrative rather than criminal in nature. Defense counsel requested leniency, citing the officer's service record, lack of prior violations on record, and the potential professional consequences already resulting from the incident, including internal review and public scrutiny. The defense also submitted character references and departmental commendations as part of the mitigation argument. Prosecutors responded by stating that the case did not involve a momentary lapse but a series of decisions made after the stop, including statements captured on video in which the officer asserted immunity from enforcement. According to the prosecution, such statements were directly relevant to the charge of misconduct and to the broader issue of public trust in law enforcement. The prosecution maintained that imposing standard penalties would not exceed statutory limits and would be consistent with prior rulings in comparable cases involving civilians. Judge Caprio delivered his ruling after reviewing the evidence and hearing arguments. According to the official judgment, the court found that the statutory requirements for the cited violations had been met beyond a reasonable doubt. The ruling stated that the evidence showed the officer was not engaged in an emergency response, did not follow required procedures for the use of emergency authority, and failed to comply with lawful instructions during the stop. The court further found that the officer's statements asserting exemption from the law were corroborated by video and testimony and were relevant to assessing responsibility under the applicable code provisions. In determining the penalty, Judge Caprio referenced sentencing guidelines and the maximum fines permitted by law for each violation. The court record shows that the judge considered both aggravating and mitigating factors, including the officer's position of authority and the expectation that senior law enforcement officials model compliance with the law. The ruling stated that while prior service and commendations were noted, they did not outweigh the importance of equal application of the law. As a result, the court imposed the maximum cumulative penalty authorized under the Municipal Code, including fines and mandatory assessments. The judgment also included a referral of the court's findings to the appropriate oversight bodies, consistent with standard procedure when cases involve public officials. Court documents indicate that this referral does not constitute a finding on employment status but ensures that administrative authorities have access to the factual record developed during the hearing. The judge clarified on the record that employment decisions rest with the relevant governing entities and not with the court. Following the ruling, the police department issued a brief statement acknowledging the court's decision and confirming that internal review processes were ongoing. The statement reiterated the department's commitment to accountability and stated that policies require all officers, regardless of rank, to comply with applicable laws and regulations. City officials also confirmed that oversight mechanisms were in place and that no immediate operational changes were announced pending the outcome of administrative proceedings. Legal analysts observing the case noted that the ruling aligns with established precedent emphasizing that public officials are subject to the same legal standards as other citizens. They pointed out that municipal courts routinely handle cases involving government employees and that the application of maximum penalties is guided by statute rather than discretion alone. The analysts also observed that the court's detailed findings could serve as a reference in future proceedings involving similar factual circumstances. The case has drawn attention within legal and law enforcement communities because it underscores the role of the judiciary in maintaining uniform enforcement. Court statistics show that cases involving alleged misuse of authority are relatively infrequent but are subject to heightened scrutiny due to their implications for public confidence. In this instance, the public record reflects a process in which evidence was presented, contested, and evaluated under standard rules of procedure. According to the docket, the defendant retains the right to appeal the ruling within the timeframe specified by law. No notice of appeal had been filed at the time the judgment was entered into the record. The court clerk confirmed that all penalties are stayed only as permitted under applicable appellate rules and that compliance deadlines will be enforced unless modified by a higher court. In concluding remarks entered into the transcript, Judge Caprio stated that the decision was based solely on the evidence in the law. He emphasized that the court does not grant exemptions based on position and that adherence to legal standards is essential to the functioning of the justice system. The remarks were brief and procedural, consistent with judicial practice in municipal cases. The proceedings concluded with the formal entry of judgment and the scheduling of any necessary compliance hearings. Observers noted that the case followed established legal processes from citation through disposition. As administrative reviews continue separately, the court's role in the matter has been completed unless further filings are made. The case remains part of the public record and is accessible through the court's docket system. Officials stated that updates regarding administrative actions, if any, would be handled through appropriate channels and in accordance with employment and privacy laws. The outcome serves as a documented example of municipal court authority to apply statutory penalties based on evidence, regardless of the defendant's professional status.